35, you're watching the Sunday Politics.
And this is the Sunday Politics in the South. Himself, the oldest gay in the village, and now he wants an apology from the government for his and other gay men's criminal convictions. But will George Montague get support for the changes he wants? Joining me in the studio today are Julian Brazier, who's a Conservative MP for Canterbury and Whitstable, and Ivor Kaplan, who's the former Labour MP for Hove. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, in Brighton, as the oldest gay in the village, this week, George Montague went to Downing Street to deliver a petition to the Prime Minister asking for an apology. He wants the government to say sorry to him and other gay men who were given criminal convictions under the Sexual Offences Act. Our political editor, Helen Catt, reports.
Now in his 90s and married to his partner of 20 years, Son Chai, George Montague says he's a lucky man. But he, like thousands of other older gay men, remains a convicted criminal.
I'm asking for an apology. Everything looks for a mate. But in my day, if you did that, you were importuning for an immoral purpose, and you were a criminal.
This week, he went to Downing Street to deliver a petition asking for an official apology. The law banning homosexuality was scrapped in 1967. And last month, the government announced its so-called Turing Law, named after the famous World War II codebreaker, which will pardon gay men convicted of offences which have since been abolished.
This legislation is fulfilling a commitment the Conservatives made in their manifesto for last year's general election. In it, they promised to build on the posthumous pardon of Alan Turing with a broader measure to lift convictions of this nature. Quite how broad that measure should be, though, has proved controversial.
Under the planned rules, posthumous pardons like Turing's would be automatic, but living gay men will have to apply. The SNP's John Nicholson brought forward a private member's bill to change that to a blanket pardon for all. And there was widespread anger when the Justice Minister and East Surrey MP Sam Gyimah talked it out.
Of course, I support the intentions behind my honourable friend's bill. We share the same objectives. The proposed blanket pardon would not provide for robust checks to ensure that only those who clearly meet the criteria can be claimed to have been pardoned. It would lead, in some cases, to people claiming, as I have said, to be cleared of offences that are still crimes, including sex with a minor and non-consensual activity.
The Ministry of Justice says a blanket pardon would risk allowing those guilty of an offence which is still a crime today claiming to be pardoned. Its way forward, it says, will be both faster and fairer. But George believes a pardon is the wrong solution anyway.
They shouldn't have ever given Alan Turing a pardon. That's an insult. What was he guilty of? Only like me, born, only able to love a man. What's wrong with that?
And the law change as planned won't help him. He was convicted in the 1970s over something that happened in a public place. Then, sexual acts between men were only legal in private. But with no gay social scene and living a double life with a wife and children, he was one of many who felt they had no choice but to risk prosecution to meet partners. It's widely agreed that the so-called Turing Law is at least a start in fixing the wrongs suffered by gay men in decades past, but there are plenty who think the government could, and perhaps should, go further.
Joining us now from Westminster is Paul Tucock from the charity Stonewall. Thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you.
Could you explain why people who've been convicted of crimes which are no longer illegal feel so strongly that an apology is more important for them than a pardon?
Well, I think it's quite clear just by the sound of the words. The problematic thing about a pardon is that it sounds like you still have done something wrong. I know that's not the intention of what the government wants to do, and that's what they've said, but actually there is an easy way to solve that, and that is to consider Mr. Montague's petition. I think it's the right thing to do and the right time to look at an apology for all the gay and bi men who were unjustly prosecuted under these laws in the last century.
And a question about the prosecution, because although homosexuality was legalised in 1967, the conviction rate among gay and bisexual men went up after that. Why did that happen?
That's right, and in fact, I wouldn't say it was decriminalised. 1967 was a partial decriminalisation. It only allowed sexual acts in private for people over 21, and that's why, and it left all of these laws in statutes, so it gave the police and the criminal justice system the ability to pursue gay and bi men in public places where they were trying to meet partners. And in fact, there's plenty of case law that shows that the police were proactive in doing that through plainclothes police officers in stings, and a lot of people who would like to have that apology were subject to that sort of treatment.
Yeah, so they feel they were persecuted, but to be fair to the government, it's lived up to its manifesto promise, and the Turing Law has come about, and that is a huge recognition of wrongs done in the past. So do you welcome that?
Absolutely, we welcome the government for filling its manifesto pledge. We actually think they should be going further. We don't agree that there is a bar to having an automatic pardon to everybody who was affected, both living and dead, because there is the argument that people will be able to claim to be pardoned when they shouldn't have been. Isn't the case. In fact, I know that Lord Cashman is going to move an amendment next week in the House of Lords to try and re-establish what John Nicholson was trying to do through his private members' bill. However, I agree, and Stonewall agrees with Mr. Montague. The best solution is a full-hearted apology. I think it would be fitting. We have made so much progress on rights for lesbian, gay and bi people in the UK. We have more to do on trans rights. That actually part of being proud of that progress should be atoning and acknowledging what was done to people in the past. And the criminalisation of gay and bi men through these laws was a terrible act over many years, right up to the 1990s. It's time for an apology right now.
Paul Toocock, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Ivor Captain, I know you came out relatively late in life and you're a prominent LGBT campaigner in Brighton and Hove. One of the arguments we heard Sam Gyimah make in Helen's report is that a blanket pardon from the Home Office might include people who are convicted for acts which are still illegal today. And that's part of the government's argument, isn't it, for just doing a pardon and for people having to apply to get that pardon?
Yeah, I don't think that's right, that people should have to apply. But at the same time, any such application would need to be carefully checked. And I think that's right and proper that government takes that view. I agree with what Paul was saying. You know, this all happened a long time ago. It's right and proper that we apologise for what these men went through and that they get a pardon. It doesn't seem to me to be difficult. It was in the Conservatives' manifesto. And, you know, I give all credit to the government because it's trying to do that. But I think the situation with the Private Members' Bill, as Julian and I both know, is always very difficult on a Friday, and maybe it would have been better to handle it in a
But you
more
want an
sensitive
apology,
way.
to be clear, rather than a pardon?
I think they do. You do need an apology because of those who are living.
So, Julian Brazier, why not just apologise? I mean, you heard about the damage, the wrongdoing, the persecution that's been done over decades.
Well, I think I actually agree with almost everything Ivor said. I think we're in danger of confusing two issues. I don't have a problem with the idea that there should be an apology too, but that wasn't, as you quite rightly showed in your earlier thing, that wasn't what the debate on the floor of the House was about. The debate there was about whether or not there should be a blanket pardon for those who are still alive. I mean, I respect Sam with his legal training and all the legal advice he will have taken. If there is a danger as a result of that, of some people collecting a pardon who may in fact be guilty of, for example, sex with a minor, bearing in mind all the effort and resource that's going into trawling both heterosexual and homosexual sexual acts back to the 70s and 80s at the moment through the inquiry, I think it would be an added complicating factor which could actually have some impact in the real world. So yes.
So you're both agreed on that you're not asking, as many people are, for people to be given a blanket pardon by the Home Office, have their criminal records cleared.
I think the apology actually would be more important, because that also deals with those who are alive, and everyone gets an apology. The pardon for those who've been found guilty of a crime, I think, is a secondary thing which does need to be checked. And Julian is right. There are different. Unfortunately, there are different levels of what happened in the 50s, 60s and 70s, and that has to be carefully considered by judicial officials.
But it is important, isn't it, for people who've lived with stigma for decades to get that apology. So you are supportive of that, in principle?
I mean, I think that it seems to me there's a very strong case for an apology. But the discussion so far, until the last couple of days, hasn't been about that at all. I support where the government is on the legal aspects, which is that I think it was right to have a blanket pardon for all those who are dead, and to have a procedure that allows an application for a pardon for those who are still living, which I think is absolutely, was in our manifesto, and I think is absolutely spot on.
So this private members bill, which was raised in the Commons, which Sam Gyimah is being accused of talking out, would you like to see the government adopt some of those measures in future, Ivor Catlin?
I think it's almost certain that's what will happen, because as I understand it, the John Nicholson's bill has been talked out, so it can't come back into the House. Michael Cashmere obviously is going to put some amendments down in the Lords, which would do something similar, but I'm kind of guessing now, I don't know if Julian knows, that it's likely to come back as a government bill or government supported bill.
That I don't know. I can't. So
would you be actively putting pressure on the government to include those? I mean, you said you agree with the principle of an apology.
It seems to me, prima facie, that there is a strong case for an apology. The only obvious counter-argument on that is, where do you stop with the apologies? I mean, we've had the issue with the World War I veterans who were shot. You know, the last child to be hanged in this country, believe it or not, was less than 200 years ago. A pretty striking fact. So where do you stop?
And this week, an apology, of course, from the Catholic Church. For women who had their children.
So there's issues around where you stop, but in principle, it seems to me that's a good idea. But I think on the item that was being debated on this particular measure on the floor of the House, it seems to me the government's got the balance roughly right, which is automatic pardons for those who are dead, and we've got to do some checking with those who are still alive.
Okay, thank you. Now it's time for some of the other news you may have missed this week.
I don't like glasses. I thought we've done well so far, and now to hear people talking about they agree with me about an apology is wonderful.